Hi, I'm Barbara Lucas, and welcome to the Green Room, where we explore the environmental topics that green up our world. Most of our interviews have focused on topics that are fairly clear-cut. Everyone wants to save energy or reduce pollution, for instance, but today's topic is a different animal, white-tailed deer to be exact. There are many controversies when it comes to deer. Are there too many? And if there are too many, what can we do about it? To help us explore these difficult questions is Randy Baker, owner and chief naturalist for Naturalist Endeavors in Columbiaville, Michigan. Randy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Tell us, what is it that your company, Naturalist Endeavors, is all about?
Naturalist Endeavors does two basic things. First, we do science and history programs where we go into the classroom and teach science or history. And then we also do wildlife tours around the world, all the way from Kenya, Africa to the Galapagos Islands.
Wow, sounds like a great job.
It's fun.
Yeah. So I know that deer are a special interest of yours. How did you get started being interested in deer?
Well, when you grow up in northeastern Michigan, you're going to be interested in deer. That's where it first began, of course. But after that, it was when I worked for state parks in Oklahoma. Oh. And we were in a situation where our park was overrun with deer. They were suffering, and we were finding deer dead and very well malnourished. And so we started doing research, studying why they were malnourished, what the problems were. And that's where the scientific research actually began with white-tailed deer.
And did you do PhD research in deer?
Did 3 years of PhD research studying white-tailed deer. We did everything from blood chemistry to analyzing what they were feeding on.
And before the show, you were telling me that you hunted with your family, your parents and your wife and your children.
My mother, dad, all hunted. My kids all hunt. In northeastern Michigan, that's definitely a tradition. So it's going on for generations.
Okay. And you're an avid gardener, I've heard.
Avid gardener. So I look at deer from several perspectives. One is as a hunter, I love hunting them. One is a biologist, I love studying them. And two is a gardener. I also know the impacts it can have on a garden.
Okay, great. Now, let's get started with some numbers. How many deer are there?
Well, too many, to be honest, at least in my opinion. We've got lots of deer. It used to be that in the 70s we had as low as 500,000 deer at one time. And then it went up to about 2 million deer by 1989. And today they're saying we have about 1.7 million, just in Michigan alone. That's a lot of deer.
Just in Michigan alone, wow. I read that in the early 1900s there were 500,000 white-tailed deer in the United States, but today over 20 million. So we've got way more.
They range that from 20 to 25 million depending on which study. It's hard to get exact numbers, but a lot of deer.
Huh. So at one point they thought there weren't enough.
At one time, there probably weren't enough. By the 1880s, they were eliminated from southern Michigan. They were just totally gone. And that's where the tradition of going to northern Michigan to go hunting began. So they were totally eliminated. If somebody saw a deer in southern Michigan 50, 60, 70 years ago, it was newsworthy. They called the newspapers about it. That's how rare they once were.
Huh. It's amazing because I moved from the country to the city this last year, and we have as many deer in the city as we did in the country. I mean, you can't even have a garden where I live. If you don't have huge fences.
The population can skyrocket rapidly. When it comes to deer populations, you can add 30, 40% every couple of years. In fact, they went from 77 to 89, they went from 1 million deer in Michigan to 2 million. And that's less than 20 years' time.
Huh. Wow. And partly because they have 2 or 3 at a time, right?
They typically have 2 at a time as adults, but the problem is they mature so quickly that it's not uncommon for up to 70% of the female fawns to mate when they themselves are 7 months old.
Wow.
And usually the following year they give birth to a single fawn. I took a doe in early season this year. She had twin fawns with her. She herself was just a little over a year old when I took her from the forest. That means she mated at 7 months, gave birth to twins her first year of life. That's why it grows so fast.
Wow. Well, the whole question of whether a species is overpopulated is very subjective. And there's a lot of controversy about whether we have too many deer or not. And I was looking at some work done by Graham Cawley, who said that it's useful to look at 4 different variables when trying to decide whether a species is overpopulated. And one is, do they threaten human life or livelihood? Another, are they too numerous for their own good? Do they reduce other species that are economically or aesthetically important? And do they cause ecosystem dysfunction?
And the white-tailed deer do all 4 of those things.
Okay.
You know, a single car deer accident, you can't control any animal from not ever having a car deer, or an animal car accident. But in the case of white-tailed deer, We average about 61,000 a year here in Michigan.
Wow.
That's a lot of accidents.
I've been in one. It was pretty scary.
I've had 2 dustings just this year alone.
You're kidding.
You know, 2 this
Oh my
year.
gosh.
Washtenaw County reports about 1,100 a year in recent years.
And I guess a lot of people actually die. 150 annually in the U.S. That's
Yeah,
a lot of people
that's
dying.
That's a lot of lives, and the expense of repairing cars goes into the millions. It's astounding what happens when a deer hits a car going 60, 70 miles an hour.
Good reason to slow down. Another good reason.
Another good reason to slow down, yeah.
And is there a time of day when you're pretty safe? You don't need to worry about it?
No.
Oh.
I'd love to say there is, but believe it or not, they're killed 24/7. About 64% are typically killed after dark, so about 2/3. But right here in Michigan, they find that about 13% are killed at dawn and dusk, and yet that's when people assume most deer are killed. It's not. We kill 21% in broad daylight. So every hour of the day, deer are being killed.
And how about seasons?
They find it peaks October to December. About 43% are killed between October and December. A little over 9,000 typically in October, a little over 11,000 in November killed, about 5,000 or so in December. So it kind of slows down a little bit. And the reason they're killed more often in October and November is it's the rut. That's the mating season. And they're busy looking for a mate rather than watching for cars. And we end up with a lot of car deer accidents. In those months, we're averaging a car deer accident every 3 minutes and 45 seconds reported. And we do know that only about half get reported. So every minute or two, somebody is hitting a deer in Michigan in those months.
Gosh, that's scary. And what about Lyme disease? Is that something that we should worry about with deer?
Lyme disease is a problem. A friend of mine, a birder, contracted Lyme disease, was on breathing tubes, and to be honest, I haven't heard what's happened to him. That was the last situation I heard. Where he contracted, we don't know. But again, the more deer you have, the more ticks you have. The more ticks you have, the more Lyme's disease. And the park I used to work at in Oklahoma had the greatest density of ticks found anywhere in the world because they also had a very great deer density. So greater deer densities means greater health hazards.
I was looking at a map on Lyme disease, and it showed there's a lot on the west side of the state for some reason.
The reason is the winters there tend to be moderated by Lake Michigan. Believe it or not, as cold as we think snow is, it's also an insulating blanket at 32 degrees. If some of these animals are exposed to cold freezing air like we have in eastern Michigan, they're more likely to die. So because of the snowpack on the west side, ticks survive at a higher rate.
I was wondering. Thanks. And the other variable, they said, do they threaten human livelihood? Are there any livelihoods that are impacted by deer?
As far as losing jobs?
Yeah.
There are people that lose their jobs because of them. Believe it or not, we've had festivals canceled in Michigan because of lack of flowers, because of white-tailed deer.
Really?
They've eaten so many flowers, they can't have a Trillium Festival anymore at Hoffmaster State Park.
Oh my goodness.
They've had it for years, and they've had to rename it something else. They still have a festival, but no longer Trillium because you can't guarantee enough Trilliums to visit.
Gosh.
And so all those people associated with that, the hotels, the restaurants, the gas station owners, their lives are going to be impacted by a lack of tourists coming over to see what used to be flowers. There's nature centers I don't visit anymore because not enough spring flowers to make it worthwhile. So
what about farming?
Crop damage is amazing, and they definitely take their toll on farm crops. I'm not sure how many millions here in Michigan, but I know in New York a few years ago, they estimated $60 million in just 1 year of crop damage. That's millions of dollars the farmer's not making to support his families.
And I read that deer can eat up to half their diet with corn or whatever from farmers' fields.
I'll tell you, when the corn like this is, when it's in the fields, they pick it out. It's high energy food, and they like it. It's candy to them. And yeah, they can have a major impact on it. Some farmers plant extra rows just to account for the destruction of the white-tailed deer.
Gosh. And one of the other variables is, are they too numerous for their own good?
Yeah, they are. Believe it or not, even their health goes down when there's too many. They're a beautiful animal. I love watching deer. But they can be, and in many places, are too numerous for their own good. When we hunted deer in northeastern Michigan in the 70s, the average deer weight was coming out at 120, 127. Then we noticed it was going down to 113, 117. Then it got to where the average went, wow, we broke 100 pounds. We could see the average size going down over the years because the habitat quality also went down. They literally sometimes eat themselves out of house and home.
How about diseases? Do they spread more when there are more of them?
When you have more of any animal concentrated, you're more likely to spread diseases. And again, northeastern Michigan, they have the bovine tuberculosis, and we were butchering deer up there also, and ran across one. And there's nothing worse than seeing nodules inside a rib cage. We do know that disease if an animal's head is close to another one and it sneezes, it can be inhaled by the other animal and therefore spreading diseases.
Just like when people get together.
Yeah, it's like getting a bunch of people together in a small area. You're more likely to spread a disease. If they're thinner, they're spread out. That animal suffers, but it's not spread to something else. And so, yeah, the more concentrated you have deer, the more problems you have.
And chronic wasting disease, is that one they catch?
Chronic wasting disease also, again, greater densities. Now, the only place they found them in Michigan, to my knowledge, is in a captive herd. And because of that, they banned baiting for a year or two. And then because it wasn't found in the wild population, they allowed baiting again. The problem with that is chronic wasting disease is not that far away. It's in southwestern Wisconsin, or southeastern Wisconsin, I should say. If it gets around the southern end of Lake Michigan and into our deer herd, we could have some major problems.
Yeah, that's pretty close.
That's pretty close. And deer will sometimes travel great distances. They found one tag doe was known to travel 100 miles. So literally within a generation, one female could travel 100 miles. If she has the disease, how long does it take for it to spread another 100 miles? They move.
Does baiting and raising food plots in the forest contribute to this kind of spread of
Baiting
disease?
does not help because, again, it concentrates the animals. It's like having a candy store and everybody goes to the candy store and they're all clumped together and one person sneezes, the other inhales. Well, when these animals are at a bait pile, it's the same type of effect. They're down there feeding on it. And one sneezes, one inhales, one drools, and one eats that corn. We find it is transmittable. And in case of some of these diseases, they can actually stay in the soil for several years at those concentrated sites.
Wow, I didn't know
Again, a concentration of animals in one spot is not a good thing. It's not what nature tends to do.
And Graham Colley mentions one of his variables is, does it reduce other economically or aesthetically important species? And you've already touched on that with wildflowers being decreased. What about landscaping?
Definitely affects landscapers. I mean, people that plant trees and shrubs around their house have a hard time nowadays trying to get them to survive. Yeah,
it's really tough.
They can eat them faster than you can plant them. And they're so adaptable. If they eat one species and it's gone, they'll switch to something else. When that species is gone, they switch to something else. But it literally is costing millions and millions of dollars every year just to replace landscapes. I was at a botanical garden not too long ago, and they're trying to grow some wonderful plants, and they've got a fence in each and every plant so the deer don't nibble it down to nothing.
And that's expensive. A fence large enough or tall enough and strong enough for a deer is like...
It's very expensive, and we can't do that to all of our native trees. We've got trees that are, good for lumber. Maples, they eat them faster than they can grow. They grow up one year, they nip it off. It grows the second year, they nip it off. By the third year, it's usually dead. So where will we get our future lumber supply for maple? Even pine trees, they rub against them and destroy them to the point where they don't make straight lumber. Again, we're going to lose out. Orchard owners have a hard time with whitetail deer destroying the orchards, either rubbing against them or nipping them off and they grow deformed. I have a lot of oaks. I plant thousands of trees on my property every year, so a few survive. And many of them are deformed to the point we'll never make lumber out of them because of the white-tailed deer.
Because they want them tall and straight.
They want them tall and straight. A crooked, gnarly tree does not make good lumber, and they cause them to grow deformed. We can't grow no cedar swamps, so white cedar will be a tree of the past. We'll read about this thing that used to exist, this thing called a cedar swamp.
Is that because it's a favorite food?
It's a favorite food. It's a balanced diet for a white-tailed deer. You can give a white-tailed deer nothing but white cedar for several months, and they remain totally healthy. It is a perfect balanced diet for white-tailed deer. My nephew
have the cedar here?
We've got white cedar right here. My nephew works at a cedar mill. There will not be a cedar mill at some time in the future because there will be no fresh cedar to cut. These deer can eat it faster than it can grow. It's an amazing plant. Lots of vitamin C, vitamin A, enough protein for deer.
And cedar swamps, I guess we can cut to the next variable is in what ways might deer cause ecosystem dysfunction? Because cedar swamps are an important part of our ecosystem.
They're a very important ecosystem. The problem with, and what's nice about white cedar swamp is the trees are so dense they slow the wind down. So it's a nice comfortable place for a lot of animal species to live in the wintertime. There's no wind chill factor, so to speak. They tend to hold the moisture, the humidity level at a high enough level where animals don't dehydrate. It's a very important ecosystem, and we're losing it. We cannot grow new cedar swamps because of white-tailed deer. It's just an impossibility. They eat it faster than it can grow. So we're losing entire ecosystem types. Our maple forests are losing their diversity. And when you lose the diversity of plant species, you lose the diversity of insect species, and therefore the insect-eating birds also suffer. So it's impacting a lot.
And what is the diet of a deer? I mean, I've read that they can eat thousands of different
Literally
species.
thousands of species,
It's
and
amazing.
that's the problem. You look at one study and they might rate maple high up on the list, the next study rates it low. That's because apparently there's something they prefer above that. But they will basically eat what's there. A friend of mine, we planted rhododendrons at her place. There's nothing left after 3 years. Rhododendrons at my place, there are. We thin the deer, they don't. Literally, spruce trees, they can't digest spruce. My spruce trees do fine. Hers are nubs. You can't find them after 2 years. But they're a very adaptable creature, and they will literally go from one plant to the next until they're gone.
What allows them to be such generalists that they can eat so many different things?
Well, first of all, they're a ruminant. They have a 4-chambered stomach. And what actually digests the food for a white-tailed deer are actually bacteria, fungi, and protozoans. And the makeup of that population of microbes in their stomach can change to adjust to break down the different kinds of plants. But you know, we call them an herbivore. They're supposed to eat just plants according to some. But we also find they eat actually animal matter. And that's surprising to a lot of people. In one North Dakota study, they found they ate as many baby birds and bird eggs
You're kidding.
as the coyotes, the fox, the mink, the creature we call predators. We've got friends that ban birds here in Michigan. And it used to be they could set up their nets to catch the birds and go have a donut or a cup of coffee, come back and remove the birds. They don't dare do that anymore because the deer will actually eat the birds directly out of the nets.
Wow.
They find they eat a lot of birds. If you go to YouTube right now, there's one. All you have to do is Google in deer eating birds, and they show you a video of a little white-tailed buck chasing a baby bird along the ground and consuming it. So we're learning that these things are not strict plant eaters. And we should have got wise to that years ago, because on Fox Island in the 1960s, they found they were wandering along the beach eating alewives, dead fish off the beach. So they eat a variety of animals that we never thought they did. Cameras with motion detectors help detect a lot of these things.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Huh, fascinating. So having such a huge impact, I mean, eating so many different things, perhaps does that affect the nutrient cycling?
It affects the nutrients because if, for example, they eat the small tree, which means it never gets to grow into a big tree, it can't drop the leaf litter back onto the ground. And that does two things. It means those leaves are not there to decompose and add back to the soil. If the leaves aren't there in big enough density, they don't hold the moisture in, and that's a problem, and because some plants need high moisture levels. So yeah, it does affect everything. It affects the nutrients in the soil. There's even erosional problems in some places because of white-tailed deer. They're that numerous in some places. They tend to walk in trails. They choose the easiest path. If they do it over and over and over, you have bare soil where the water tends to concentrate and run into little streams.
And I've seen along these paths, deer paths, I've seen, like, for instance, garlic mustard growing. And some people say that the seeds get stuck on their fur and that they're actually spreading.
It's not just, I'm not sure about how the seeds are spread, but I do know there's places that
or
spread.
their hooves, or maybe that's what I heard. They get stuck in their hooves.
I doubt that, because I've seen garlic mustard honestly growing where I know no deer would ever step. But what does happen is the garlic mustard grows best when there is bare soil exposed. So the less leaf litter you have, the more likely it is to grow. And the more the native plant species are destroyed by the white-tailed deer, the more openings there are for this invasive species. No two plants can grow in the same place at the same time. So if the deer eat the native species, it now makes an opening for the invasive aliens.
Well, we have some slides. One is of fencing, deer fencing, and it shows the plants growing on one side of the fence and the other being just cleared practically. And the other is the browse line, where you can see that they've...
In some places, browse lines are real easy to see, and a lot of people don't understand what a browse line is. A deer is not often as tall as people assume they are. They typically can reach about 5 feet high. So So about 5 feet, they reach up as high as they can. And over the years, all the vegetation from 5 feet or below has been destroyed. So there's a line at which there are leaves above and very few below, and that we call a browse line. And in a coniferous forest like a cedar swamp, it's real distinct. It's very easy to see. You can see it, half a mile away. It is harder to see on a deciduous forest, the ones that shed their leaves. It's much harder to see. And sometimes people get in a deciduous forest and they don't even realize there's a problem. They think it's wonderful. It's easy walking. No brush to go through. They don't realize there should be brush for the animals. It's missing. But even in a hardwood forest nowadays, we can see a browse line if you look closely for it, typically at 5 foot level.
All right, so we've pretty much determined that there are a lot of deer
Oh,
around.
there's definitely a lot of deer.
Okay, now what can we do about it? That's a huge question. What are some of the different ways?
It is a very hard thing to eliminate. They've tried birth control. It simply doesn't work on a large enough scale to be practical. Not when you can, increase your population from 1 to 2 million in just, 10 or 12 years. You just can't do it with that. Hunting is the most practical method, but even that has its limitations. You couldn't get much more generous than we are right now in Michigan. The rules changed recently to where this last year you could buy 5 doe licenses a day, starting on September 6th and going clear up to January 1st. You could buy like 400 or 500 licenses.
Wow. And
yet even with that, the deer herd is far above what we should want. They're trying to reduce the herd down to 500,000 or so in southern Michigan. Current estimate is 800 and some thousand. So we're not even close to meeting the objectives, even with that lenient to hunting. Because there are places we can't hunt.
A lot of landowners don't want hunters
A lot of
on their
landowners
land.
won't let them in. They think they're being kind to the deer sometimes by not allowing hunters to come in, but I don't consider it being kind when they lose their body weight, they lose their health, they take out entire ecosystems because they're overpopulated. And I love deer, they're a beautiful creature. But our hunting isn't doing it. It's amazing that we can't do it that way. Some cities have hired sharpshooters to thin them out, but even that has its limited effects. And you can't do it 1 year. With their reproductive potential, you got to do it over and over and over.
And there's a lot of controversy about sharpshooters.
A lot of controversy about sharpshooters.
Don't like to see deer.
People don't want to see it. They
They're
don't.
so charismatic. They're so beautiful.
They are so beautiful, but to me it's what I sometimes say. It's like an oil slick. An oil slick on water is actually beautiful. It's like a rainbow, but it doesn't mean it's healthy.
Yeah.
I mean, I love seeing deer, but we have to understand that seeing too many, to me, is an unhealthy thing.
Yeah.
We find the forest gets degraded at populations of 12 to 14 per square mile. Many places we look at a field, see 20 or 30 at one time.
Yeah.
That's definitely more than 12 per square mile.
A lot of people say that, well, the deer were here first, and we're just bothering them. But you mentioned in previous to the show, you were talking about we created a problem because we've cut the forest up and caused...
We've altered the habitat that actually favors them. Deer were not an animal of major forests. Deer actually like what we call ecotones, edges, where two kinds of habitats touch. That is what a deer likes. Now, southern Michigan traditionally had the Native Americans burning the forest, creating edges. So when early settlers came to Michigan, there were some in southern Michigan. Virtually none or very, very few in the north.
Really?
But as we made openings in the north, we altered the habitat, and the deer population rose.
So we've kind of created the problem.
We've created the problem. This is not a natural situation. And by the way, predators today could never control today's deer herd. All the wolves, all the mountain lions in the world can never control what we have today.
Oh, and that's another thing. There's fewer predators, so we've got a huge problem.
And to be honest, it's probably not a major problem because our cars kill 61,000 in Michigan that we know of. Our hunters kill 400 and some thousand. That's more than all the wolves and mountain lions ever thought of. And
Good point.
it would be nice if they were here, but the problem is they won't tolerate us.
Yeah.
And they don't tolerate each other very well, and that's why their numbers will only reach just a certain level, and after that the predators tend to spread out.
Okay. Well, I found an interesting solution on the web. They said that in New Zealand they have allowed deers to be raised in farms and sold just like cattle for beef or pork or whatever. They have regulations, so they check and make sure it's healthy for people. And I noticed on the web that they're selling New Zealand venison for $40 a pound. I mean, it's very gourmet.
Very good meat.
And they're saying that it's incredibly healthy, way less fat and cholesterol, way higher in iron and all kinds of different nutritional value.
A commercial marketing here in the United States may help. The problem is it would be political suicide to propose it. Because what took our deer herd down to 500,000 for the entire country at one time was market hunting. So we have a bad history, a bad flavor in the mouth of American hunters and biologists with the idea of commercial hunting. But it may be the only practical method to make it worth somebody's while to do it. But then you have the controversy. What is too many deer versus what is too few deer? Are they going to will they get greedy? What will the regulations be? And if a hunter goes into the forest and doesn't get his deer that year, is he going to be upset because the guy down the street made a living by shooting 400 of them? So that's the controversy you're into with it. It may be a practical method if people would tolerate it.
We don't have a lot of hunters, but on the other hand, in Michigan, the Michigan United Conservation Corps is very powerful and influential. I guess they're the most numerous conservation statewide group in the country. So,
and it's actually made up of many other conservation groups within it. So it's not like
it?
just one organization. It's made up of many. I've been a member. It's a great group.
But hunters, their needs and opinions are
you bet.
well heard.
And it does with politicians too. You don't get elected by saying, hey, we're going to sell your herd. We're going to make it a commercial prospect. However, we do sell other resources. We have state forests and national forests. We allow lumbermen to come in and harvest it. State makes a profit off it. It's got to be managed properly. So that has been done. We allow people to commercially fish our Great Lakes. Individuals make a living off it as long as they follow rules and regulations. It could probably be done with deer biologically. We could have rules that would allow it and put limits, those types of things.
Okay.
The biggest thing holding it back would be public approval.
Interesting. Well, we're out of time. How can people reach you if they would like to get more information?
If they'd like to reach me, they can reach me at my email address. It's naturalistendev, E-N-D-E-V, @hotmail.com.
Great. Thank you so much for being here, Randy.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
We provided links to resources relevant to today's show on our webpage at ewashington.org/greenroom. Thanks for joining us here in the Green Room.